Admiral Vexkar's 6 eyes glowed with anticipation as he studied the blue marble floating in the holographic display. Earth hung there like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked, completely unaware that the most powerful military force in 3 galactic arms was preparing to harvest its resources and enslave its population. The command bridge of the massive dreadnought Thalarian Pride buzzed with quiet efficiency. Officers with scales that shimmered purple and gold moved between control stations, their clawed hands dancing across alien interfaces. The air hummed with the low vibration of the ship's quantum engines, a sound that had struck terror into civilizations across nearly 1,000 worlds. "Show me their pathetic defenses again," Vexkar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. The hologram shifted to display Earth's orbital space, revealing a handful of primitive satellites and what appeared to be early space stations constructed from welded metal plates. Commander Zeloth approached with data tablets clutched in her forearms. Her smaller eyes darted nervously as she read the intelligence reports. "Our deep space reconnaissance confirms the humans have barely mastered fusion technology. Their fastest vessels require months to travel between their own planets. They still use chemical rockets to escape their planet's gravity well." The Admiral's mandibles clicked with amusement. "And their weapons? Nuclear fission bombs, Admiral. The same technology our ancestors abandoned 3,000 cycles ago. Their largest weapons could barely scratch the paint on our escort vessels." Zeloth's voice carried a note of professional disdain. "Our xenobiologists have studied their radio transmissions extensively. They broadcast their primitive entertainment and news openly, showing us exactly how unprepared they are for contact with a superior civilization." Vexkar walked to the massive viewing port that dominated the front of the bridge. Beyond the energy shielding, stars wheeled slowly as the massive fleet prepared for the final jump to Earth's solar system. 10,000 ships stretched out in perfect formation, battle cruisers the size of cities, carriers launching endless swarms of fighter craft, and the massive planet crackers that could split worlds in half if the humans proved too stubborn to surrender quickly. "Tell me about their society," the Admiral said, though he already knew the answer. Every primitive species followed the same predictable patterns. "Divided into hundreds of competing nations, Admiral. They cannot even agree on basic resource distribution among their own kind. Our psychological warfare division estimates they will surrender within 6 standard hours of our arrival. The weak will betray the strong in exchange for better treatment under our rule." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the engines. Vexkar had heard similar reports 847 times before. The pattern never changed. A divided, primitive species would detect their massive fleet, panic, argue among themselves, and finally send desperate surrender transmissions begging for mercy. Within days, their strongest would be working in the mining colonies while their brightest minds served in research facilities, grateful for the privilege of contributing to the Empire's endless expansion. "What about their space-based infrastructure?" Vexkar asked, though he expected nothing surprising. "Laughably inadequate, Admiral. A few small orbital stations that appear to be research facilities. Some basic communication satellites. Nothing that could pose even a theoretical threat to our advanced scout ships, let alone the full conquest fleet." Zeloth paused to consult another data tablet. "They do seem unusually fond of broadcasting radio signals into deep space, but our analysts believe this is simply primitive wishful thinking about contacting other civilizations." The Admiral's chest rumbled with what passed for laughter among his species. Broadcasting their location to any predator willing to listen. How remarkably stupid, even for a Category 3 species. What none of the Thalarian officers knew was that those radio signals were not the desperate attempts of an isolated species to find friends among the stars. They were carefully crafted deceptions, designed to make any listening civilization believe exactly what the Thalarians now believed, that Earth was primitive, divided, and helpless. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in facilities that existed in folded space-time, human technicians monitored every electromagnetic emission from the approaching fleet. They had been tracking the Thalarian Empire's movements for decades, watching as they conquered world after world with the same predictable tactics. The humans knew exactly when the fleet would arrive, exactly what weapons they carried, and exactly how overconfident their commanders had become. Captain Minho sat in a chair that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, his consciousness linked directly to Earth's true defensive network. Around him, displays showed the real scope of human technology, reality anchors that could rewrite the laws of physics, time dilution fields that could age attacking fleets to dust in seconds, and weapon systems that operated on principles the Thalarians had not even theorized. "The Thalarian fleet will drop out of hyperspace in approximately 14 minutes, reported Lieutenant Yuna, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what was approaching. All systems are ready. The dimensional barriers are holding steady. Minho nodded, watching as the alien fleet's quantum signatures appeared at the edge of sensor range. For 300 years, humanity had maintained the illusion of being a young, primitive civilization while secretly developing technology that made them the most advanced species in the local galaxy cluster. They had learned from studying other civilizations that aggressive expansion inevitably led to conflict with something even more dangerous. Better to remain hidden, to let the predators reveal themselves before striking. The Thalarian Empire was about to learn why Earth had remained unconquered for so long, and why their string of easy victories was about to end in the most spectacular defeat in galactic history. The fabric of space twisted and tore as 10,000 Thalarian warships burst from hyperspace in perfect battle formation. Admiral Vexcar stood proudly on his command bridge, expecting to see a helpless blue world surrounded by a few primitive metal satellites spinning slowly in the void. Instead, his senses screamed warnings that made no sense. "Admiral," Navigation Officer Crazon whispered, his scaled hands shaking as they moved across his control panel. "Something is wrong. Very wrong." The main display flickered and changed, showing the Sol system in detail. Where the asteroid belt should have been floating as scattered rocks and debris, something impossible stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Massive structures, each one larger than Thalarian battle stations, hung in perfect geometric patterns throughout the entire region. "What am I looking at?" Vexcar demanded, his voice tight with confusion. "The asteroid belt, Admiral. But it has been changed. Every single asteroid has been converted into some kind of defensive platform. Our computers count over 3 million individual structures, each one producing energy readings that exceed our measurement capabilities." The bridge fell silent except for the panicked beeping of overloaded sensors. Weapons Officer Drexmar looked up from his station with wide, terrified eyes. "Admiral, those platforms are not just converted asteroids. They are something else entirely. Our scanners cannot even identify what materials they are made from." As the Thalarian fleet watched in growing horror, the defense platforms began to activate. Lights that burned brighter than stars appeared across their surfaces. Energy fields that bent space itself started forming between them, creating a web of power that surrounded the entire inner solar system like a glowing cage. "How is this possible?" Commander Zeloth whispered. "Our intelligence said they were primitive. They should not have technology like this for another 1,000 years of development." Admiral Vexcar stared at the display, watching as energy readings climbed higher and higher. Each defense platform was generating more power than his entire conquest fleet combined. And there were millions of them. "Sir," Communications Officer Velith called out, his voice cracking with stress. "We are receiving a transmission from the third planet. It appears to be directed specifically at us." Far below the surface of Earth's moon, in chambers that existed in folded dimensions, Captain Minho sat in his command chair watching the alien fleet through monitors that showed things in ways normal eyes could never see. The Thalarian ships appeared as dim shadows compared to the brilliant glow of human technology surrounding them. "They look surprised," observed Lieutenant Yuna from her position at the tactical station. Her fingers moved smoothly across controls that responded to thought as much as touch. "Their sensor arrays are overloading trying to analyze the defense grid." Captain Minho nodded, studying the alien fleet with the calm attention of someone who had been preparing for this moment for decades. Around him, the command center hummed with quiet efficiency. Officers worked at stations that seemed to be made of crystallized light, their displays showing information in languages that had been developed specifically for managing technology beyond normal human understanding. "Are all platforms ready?" Minho asked. "All 3.7 million defense platforms are online and fully charged," Yuna reported. "The dimensional anchors are stable. Reality distortion fields are at maximum strength. The Thalarians cannot escape back to hyperspace even if they wanted to." Through the quantum communication network, Minho could feel the presence of millions of automated systems throughout the solar system. Defense platforms that had been disguised as asteroids for centuries were now revealing their true nature. Each one contained technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level, bend space and time, and project force fields that could stop entire fleets. "They fell for the deception perfectly," Minho said with satisfaction. 300 years of fake radio broadcasts showing primitive technology. 300 years of carefully staged rocket launches and basic space stations. They never suspected that we were already traveling between stars when their ancestors were still learning to make fire. The truth was that humanity had been watching the galaxy for thousands of years. They had seen the rise and fall of dozens of aggressive empires, each one following the same pattern of conquest and expansion until they encountered something they could not defeat. The humans had learned from observing these failures. Instead of announcing their presence and starting wars, they had chosen to remain hidden while developing technology that made them practically invincible. "Sir," Lieutenant Jin called from the communication station. "The Thalarian fleet is trying to analyze our defense platforms. Their computers are burning out from the effort." Minho smiled. The defense platforms were not just weapons. They were demonstrations of human capability, designed to show aggressive species exactly how outmatched they were. Each platform contained technology that operated on principles the Thalarians had never even imagined. They could manipulate gravity, alter the flow of time, and reshape reality itself within limited areas. "The Thalarians have conquered almost 1,000 worlds," Yuna observed, watching as the alien fleet's formation began to waver. "They have never encountered real resistance before." "That is exactly why they needed to be stopped," Minho replied. "Every empire thinks they are unstoppable until they meet something stronger. Today, the Thalarian Empire learns that humanity has been the strongest force in this region of space for a very long time." The defense platforms continued powering up, their combined energy output now exceeding the total power generation of most civilizations. The Thalarian fleet hung in space like insects caught in a web of light, finally understanding that they had stumbled into a trap that had been waiting for them since the moment they decided to threaten Earth. The communication channel crackled to life across the vast emptiness of space, carrying voices between two very different civilizations. On the bridge of the Thalarian flagship, Admiral Vexkar stood frozen as a calm human voice reached his ears through the ship's speakers. "Greetings, Thalarian Empire," the voice said with polite formality. "This is Captain Minho of Earth Defense Command. You have entered our solar system without an invitation. We maintain a strict policy about uninvited guests, so I am offering you exactly one opportunity to turn around and leave peacefully." The bridge fell completely silent. Every Thalarian officer stared at the communication console in shock. After conquering 847 worlds, no primitive species had ever dared to speak to them as equals. They were always greeted with panic, desperate pleas for mercy, or terrified silence. Admiral Vexkar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. His 6 eyes blazed with outrage as he stepped toward the communication station. The idea that these backward humans would dare to give him orders was beyond insulting. "Pathetic creature," Vexkar snarled into the transmitter, his voice dripping with contempt. "You will surrender your world immediately or face total destruction. The Thalarian Empire has conquered nearly 1,000 worlds across 3 galactic arms. Your primitive species cannot possibly comprehend the power you are facing." Deep beneath Earth's moon, Captain Minho sat calmly in his command chair, listening to the alien admiral's threats with the patience of someone who had heard similar words many times before. The human command center was filled with soft light and quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the harsh military atmosphere of the Thalarian bridge. "Their response is exactly what we expected," Minho said to his officers. "They cannot imagine that anyone would refuse to surrender to them." Lieutenant Nari looked up from her weapons console, her young face serious. "Captain, should we show them our actual defensive systems? The asteroid platforms are impressive, but they still think those are our primary defenses." Communications Officer Jin shook his head with amusement. "They really believe we are a primitive species that got lucky with some advanced technology. They have no idea what they are really facing." Captain Minho considered the situation carefully. The Thalarian Empire had built its power on fear and overwhelming force. Every world they conquered made them more confident that nothing in the galaxy could challenge them. That confidence had now led them into a trap they could not escape from. "Activate the real fleet," Minho ordered with a sigh. "It seems they need a clearer demonstration of our capabilities." The space around Earth began to shimmer like water disturbed by wind. What had appeared to be empty vacuum suddenly revealed itself to be something else entirely. Reality twisted and folded as massive shapes began to materialize throughout the solar system. On the Thalarian bridge, Sensor Officer Crazon screamed in panic as his instruments went completely insane. "Admiral! Something is happening. Space itself is changing." The main display flickered and distorted as it tried to show what was appearing around them. Shapes that hurt to look at directly began forming in the darkness. They were ships, but ships unlike anything the Thalarians had ever seen or imagined. "What are those things?" Admiral Vexkar whispered, his voice barely audible. The human vessels were impossibly large, their hulls seeming to be made from crystallized spacetime itself. They existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing as ghostly outlines that shifted and changed as they moved. Some were shaped like enormous geometric crystals that rotated through angles that should not have been possible. Others looked like flowing metal rivers that curved through space in ways that made no sense. Our senses cannot read them properly, Weapons Officer Drexmar reported, his voice shaking. They register as being there and not there at the same time. Our targeting systems cannot lock onto them because they exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The Thalarian fleet, which had seemed so massive and threatening just moments before, suddenly appeared tiny and primitive in comparison. The human ships dwarfed even the largest Thalarian dreadnoughts, and there were hundreds of them appearing throughout the solar system. How many ships are there? Vexcar demanded. I cannot count them, Admiral, Crazon replied, his hands shaking as they worked frantically over his controls. Every time our sensors try to focus on one ship, it reveals 3 more hiding behind it in dimensions we cannot see. They might number in the thousands, or there might be only a few dozen that exist in so many dimensions that we see them as hundreds. Captain Minho watched the alien fleet's growing panic through his dimensional monitors. The Thalarian ships were now completely surrounded by human vessels that could strike from angles that did not exist in normal space. Their energy shields and armor would be useless against weapons that could attack them from the inside out, or prevent them from ever having existed in the first place. Send another message, Minho ordered. Let them know this is their final warning. The communication channel opened again, and Captain Minho's voice reached the terrified Thalarian bridge with the same calm politeness as before. Admiral Vexcar, you now see a small portion of Earth's actual defensive capabilities. We have been observing your empire's expansion for many years, and we have been preparing for this meeting. You have one final opportunity to withdraw your fleet and return to your own territory. If you choose to attack, we will defend ourselves with methods that your species has not yet learned to understand. Admiral Vexcar stared at the display showing the impossible human fleet, finally beginning to understand that his conquest of Earth was about to become the greatest military disaster in Thalarian history. The moment of decision arrived with deadly silence. Captain Minho sat motionless in his command chair, watching the Thalarian fleet through monitors that showed reality from angles normal minds could not comprehend. The alien ships hung in space like ancient predators, their weapons charging for what they believed would be an easy slaughter. They are powering up their planet cracker weapons, Lieutenant Una reported calmly. Energy signatures indicate they plan to split Earth in half if we do not surrender immediately. Captain Minho closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. 300 years of careful preparation had led to this single instant. The Thalarian Empire's reign of terror across 1,000 worlds was about to end in the most complete defeat any military force had ever experienced. Fire, he commanded quietly. The word carried across quantum communication channels to every human weapon system in the solar system. What happened next lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, though to the Thalarians it seemed both instantaneous and eternal. The human weapons did not operate like normal military technology. They did not fire energy beams or launch missiles that would impact against enemy hulls. Instead, they reached backward through time itself, targeting the very concept of the Thalarian fleet's existence. Admiral Vexcar watched in growing horror as entire sections of his armada simply stopped being there. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from reality as if they had never existed at all. Ships that had been built in orbital factories decades ago were retroactively prevented from ever being constructed. Their crews ceased to exist, not dying but having never been born. What is happening to my fleet? Vexcar screamed, watching as his sensors showed fewer and fewer ships with each passing second. Where are they going? Science Officer Rentork stared at his instruments in complete confusion. Admiral, the ships are not being destroyed. They are being, UN-made. According to our historical records, the missing vessels were never built. The crew members who served on them were never recruited into the military. It is as if time itself is being rewritten. The Thalarian flagship shuddered as reality waves washed over it. Emergency lights flickered as the ship's computers tried to process data that contradicted everything they understood about physics. Entire decks reported that crew members had vanished, leaving behind only confused memories of people who apparently had never existed. But for the ships that survived the initial temporal assault, something even stranger began to happen. A new kind of weapon reached them, one that did not destroy but transformed. Admiral! Rentork suddenly screamed, his voice filled with panic. The crew? Something is happening to the crew. Throughout the surviving Thalarian vessels, a subtle change began spreading through every living being. Their DNA was being rewritten at the molecular level, but not to cause harm. Instead, the bioweapons were rapidly evolving them into something completely different. Weapons Officer Drexmar looked up from his console with confusion spreading across his scaled features. "Admiral, I no longer understand why we are here. What purpose does conquest serve? Why would anyone want to cause suffering to innocent beings?" The change spread quickly through the ship as genetic modifications activated dormant portions of the Thalarian brain. Regions responsible for empathy and philosophical thinking suddenly expanded, while areas that generated aggression and territorial behavior shrank rapidly. "I feel different," Commander Zeloth said, her forearms trembling as profound thoughts filled her mind. How could we have spent our lives causing pain to others? What kind of monsters were we? Admiral Vexkar felt the transformation reaching his own consciousness. Concepts that had been completely foreign to him just moments before now seemed perfectly clear and important. The value of peaceful cooperation. The beauty of helping others instead of dominating them. The terrible waste of resources that military conquest represented. "I do not understand," he whispered, tears beginning to form in his 6 eyes. "Why did we ever think violence was acceptable? How did we convince ourselves that destroying other civilizations was somehow noble or necessary?" Around the bridge, every Thalarian officer was experiencing the same rapid evolution. Their scales began to shift color from aggressive purple and gold to calmer blues and greens. Their claws retracted as they no longer felt any need for weapons. Most importantly, their minds filled with an overwhelming desire to spend their remaining lives helping others and seeking philosophical truth. Aboard the human flagship, Weapons Officer Hugh barely looked up from his console as he monitored the bioweapon deployment. "Target genetic modification complete, Captain. All surviving Thalarian personnel have been successfully evolved into peaceful philosophers." Captain Minho nodded, watching the transformation with the same calm attention he had shown throughout the brief engagement. "Casualties on our side?" "0, sir. We did not even need to activate our main defensive systems. This was handled entirely by the automated pest control network." Lieutenant Nari shook her head in amazement. "They really believed they could conquer us with primitive kinetic weapons and fusion explosives. It is like watching insects try to attack a city with tiny sticks." The battle, if it could even be called that, was completely over. Of the original 10,000 Thalarian warships, fewer than 300 remained. The rest had been erased from time itself, their materials returned to the cosmic dust from which they had originally been formed. The surviving vessels now contained crews who were more interested in discussing ethics and beauty than in continuing any kind of military campaign. Captain Minho stood from his command chair, satisfied that the threat had been neutralized with minimal damage to anyone involved. The Thalarian Empire's expansion had ended not with death and destruction, but with forced evolution into something better. The message reached every corner of the former Thalarian Empire simultaneously, transmitted through quantum channels that bypassed all known communication networks. On 847 conquered worlds, the same calm voice spoke in perfect translations of hundreds of different languages. "People of the former Thalarian Empire," the voice announced, "your period of oppression has ended. The Thalarian military force has been dissolved. Slavery is now permanently abolished across all your worlds. Aggressive expansion is banned throughout this region of space. Welcome to your liberation." On the mining world of Kethval, where humanoid beings had labored in underground tunnels for 3 generations, the Overseer robot simply stopped functioning. Security barriers powered down. Prison gates opened by themselves. The confused miners emerged into sunlight they had not seen for years, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "Are we truly free?" whispered Jelma, an elderly miner whose grandfather had been enslaved when the Thalarians first conquered their world. "Can this be real?" Similar scenes played out across hundreds of planets. On Veltaran, an agricultural world where the population had been forced to grow food for Thalarian military bases, the supply ships that came to collect their harvest simply never arrived. Instead, they received seeds for crops they could grow for themselves, along with technical manuals explaining how to build better farming equipment. The most confused beings in the galaxy were the Thalarian military personnel who had been transformed during the brief battle with Earth. Admiral Vexkar found himself on a peaceful mountain on Earth, wearing simple robes and serving tea to visitors in a monastery that seemed to exist in perfect harmony with nature. "I still remember commanding a fleet of 10,000 warships," he told a group of former Thalarian refugees who had come to visit him. "But those memories feel like a terrible nightmare from which I have finally awakened. How could I have believed that causing suffering to others was somehow noble?" The transformation had been complete and permanent. Every former Thalarian military officer now felt physically sick at the thought of violence. They spent their days studying philosophy, creating art, and trying to understand how they had ever justified their previous actions. The humans did not simply defeat us, Vexcar continued, pouring tea with steady hands that had once commanded planet-destroying weapons. They saved us from ourselves. They have been watching the galaxy for thousands of years, allowing younger species to learn and grow. But when someone threatens those who cannot defend themselves, the humans act. On distant worlds, other aggressive civilizations received very different messages. The Kreftan hegemony, which had been planning to expand into former Thalarian territory, suddenly found their military leaders developing an intense interest in peaceful exploration instead of conquest. The Valdari supremacy discovered that their weapons factories had mysteriously converted themselves into medical research facilities overnight. Captain Minho stood on the observation deck of Earth Defense Station Alpha, a structure that existed partially in normal space and partially in 11 other dimensions. The view showed not just the stars visible to normal eyes, but the quantum threads that connected every civilization in the galaxy. Lieutenant Sujin joined him, carrying a data tablet that glowed with information from across known space. Report on the other aggressive civilizations. Minho asked, though he already suspected what she would tell him. The effects are spreading faster than we expected, Sujin replied with a satisfied smile. The Kreftan hegemony just announced they are dissolving their conquest fleets and converting them into scientific research vessels. The Valdari supremacy is turning their warships into hospital ships to provide medical aid to worlds they previously attacked. The Nexuai Empire has ordered all their military bases to be converted into schools and universities. Minho nodded, watching as streams of data flowed across his enhanced vision. The quantum communication network that connected all human technology allowed him to observe the galaxy in real time. Aggressive species throughout several spiral arms were suddenly discovering that peaceful cooperation was more rewarding than military conquest. How many civilizations have changed their behavior in the past 6 hours? He asked. 4 to 7 major military powers have announced peace initiatives, Sujin reported. Another 112 smaller aggressive groups have simply disbanded their military forces entirely. The effect is accelerating as word spreads about what happened to the Thalarian Empire. The transformation was not limited to military forces. Throughout the galaxy, worlds that had been isolated by fear were beginning to communicate with each other. Trade networks that had been disrupted by constant warfare were reforming. Species that had never met before were sharing knowledge and resources. The humans have given us all a gift, Admiral Vexcar told his visitors back on Earth. They showed us that the galaxy does not have to be a place of endless conflict. There is someone watching who will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Deep in the quantum networks that managed Earth's true technology, artificial intelligences that existed as pure thought continued their endless watch. They monitored every communication, every ship movement, every indication that aggressive behavior might be returning to the galaxy. The humans had learned from observing thousands of years of galactic history that peace required constant vigilance. Captain Minho turned away from the observation window, satisfied that the immediate crisis was over. Earth would return to its careful disguise as a primitive world, broadcasting simple radio signals into space while its real technology remained hidden in folded dimensions. The galaxy would continue to believe that humans were still learning to build basic spacecraft, never suspecting that they were actually the most advanced civilization in known space. The universe was now a little safer, and humanity intended to keep it that way, watching quietly from the shadows until someone else needed their protection.